Hello, everyone. Hope you're all safe and well. Welcome to this program, Read Your Bible Through in a Year. And we are on day 28. Today, we will be reading chapters 19 and 20 from the book of Exodus. And in the New Testament, we will be reading Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 18, verses 21 through to 35. Thank you very much for tuning in. And if you have not subscribed for this YouTube channel, please do subscribe. And don't forget to click on the bell icon so you will receive your reminders and notifications. Also, please share this link to your friends and family so they will be blessed as well. Let's go straight to our today's reading. Yesterday we read chapter 18 where Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, visits him and he gives him some instructions to say that you have to appoint officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties and tens. So he will not be wasting his time judging the people. Now in chapter 19, actually the Israelite reach Mount Sinai. So the whole journey from Egypt to Sinai. Now, what happened there is what we will be reading chapter 19 and 20. We will be starting with the Ten Commandments. God give Moses and the Israelite the Ten Commandments. We will be going through chapter by chapter now. Chapter 19, they reach Mount Sinai. So I just want to give you some insight into this chapter 19 because chapter 19 is very, very important. Now God begins to speak to Moses and tells Moses for the people has to sanctify themselves. Now, the notes about Mount Sinai, for next 1 year, Israelite will be camped at Mount Sinai, and it is a very, very important time. So the Israel remain at Mount Sinai for almost years. Some of the highest and the lowest points in the history occurred there. At Sinai, they rebelled against God and made an idol of gold, but also at this holy mountain, they received and ratified the Ten Commandments and much of the law of Moses. So their camping at Mount Sinai is a very, very important event in this Exodus. And also, God made a conditional promise to Israel that if they would obey him and keep his covenant, he would regard them and treat them in a very special way. The people chose to make a golden calf and forsake the God who had rescued them from the Egyptian slavery. So this event, as well as the persistent infidelity throughout most of their history, greatly limited the extent to which the Israelite could realize their promises. So we see that God giving them 10 commandments, and he says that if you obey my words, you will be blessed in a very special way. But the Israelite chose to disobey God and worship the golden calf, etc. So at Mount Sinai, and chapter 19, we read the people sanctify, and in chapter 20 we read the Ten Commandments. Now you know all this, every one of you know the Ten Commandments, but here one of the very important thing is when these 10 commandments, God's covenant with the Israel began, the ancient rabbis isolated, they think they isolated 613 separate commandments in the entire law of Moses. But these 10 commandments are the principle or the basic commandments on which other rests upon. So I just repeat, I've just written a note, so I'm just reading out from there. So the earlier rabbis, they had about 600, they isolated about 613 separate commandments from the law of Moses, but this basic 10 commandments, all the other commandments are based on this 10 commandments. So you have the first 10 commandments is divided into two sections. The first 4 commandments is about loving God. the love of God. And the next 6 commandments are the love of neighbors. That is why in Matthew chapter 22, verses 35 to 40, which we will be reading shortly, Jesus tells them there's 2 commandments on which all the other commandments are based. One is love your neighbors and love of God. Or you can say love of God and love of fellow men. These 2 are the basic commandments on which all the other commandments rest. So chapter 19, the Israelites are sanctified. In chapter 20, we read the 10 commandments. Then God says about the altar. So he says the altar should be built on undressed stones, not the dressed stone. Dressed stones mean using the chisel and shaping the stones. So God says even to dress the stone, that is chipping the stone or chopping the stone, will defile the stone. So what he says is the altar for him should be built in uncut stones. So he wants it to be so pure. His altar should be so pure. So that is what we will be ending today's reading. So I want you to concentrate on these 10 commandments, divide them, where that division is there. Love your God, love the Lord your God with all your heart, etc. And once if you read this 10 commandments and see where you can divide that love of God and love of neighbor. So in the New Testament, we go today to 28th day. So we will be reading chapter 18, verses 21 through to 35. Okay, so in 21, we again Jesus continues his discourse on about the kingdom of heaven. So he gives an example. So you can see lots of examples as we saw to what shall I compare the kingdom of heaven. We read a lot of this again and again in chapters 13, and he was comparing it with the parable of sower, the parable of hidden treasure, parable of net, etc. And now we have the another parable he talks about is the therefore the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle the accounts. So here he forgives one of his servants, but he goes and doesn't forgive another person, so he's put in prison. So that's the parable we read about in chapter 18, verses 21 through to 35. So what we are looking today is the Exodus, chapters 19 and 20, and Matthew chapter 18, verses 1 through to 21 through to 35. So thank you very much for listening to this channel and this program. Please do share. Just to remind you again, if you have not subscribed for this channel, please do subscribe, and don't forget to click on the bell icon, and don't forget to share this link with your friends and families. Until I see you tomorrow, stay blessed and God bless. Goodbye.